Hi, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Facundo Corvalan. I'm from San Luis, Argentina. I work on the social sciences department here in the University of San Luis. And it's a pleasure to be here today to expose my work about the solution by Walter Elkin to the Methodenstreit. First, I want to say that the debate over methods arose in intellectual conflict at the end of the 19th century, whose central problem was the establishment of the theory for the study of the social sciences, in particular for the economic sciences. Such a conflict is led on the one hand by the German historical school, headed by Gustav von Schmoller, and the other hand by the founder of the Austrian School of Economics, Karl Menger. Since its coinage by Eugene von Baumgarten, the concept of Methodenstreit has acquired a uniform notion in Anglo-American literature to refer to the description of a confrontation between the Mengerian abstract deductive method and the Schmollerian empiricist inductive method and its followers. But this topic did not develop exclusively in the Germanic linguistic world, especially relevant at the time in the debate between Germans and Austrians, but rather affected the disciplinary relationship between history and economics in different areas. For example, in the British, where the conflict had very strong resonances. For this reason, this work was organicized with a brief mention of the antecedents to later raise the perspective of the two groups participating in the conflict, the German Historical School of Economics and the Austrian with Menger, and it ends with a private contribution of Walter Elk. In the final considerations, scientists' contribution of the work is made. In second place, I would like to say that it should be noted that the confrontation between Schmoller and Menger had extensive antecedents, since the controversy over the application on the inductive method in economics can be traced between Richard Jones and his friends William Webel and the Ricardian classic its early year of 1831. When he published the State of the Distribution of Wealth. In the historicist tradition, it can be traced back to the Georgian Gustav Droysen, and in the broader context of the German philosophy of life, within which is Rodolph Elkin, the Walter Feather, and its inspiration. And at the same time, we must take into account into our irrevocably opposition both a time by William Dilthey between the natural science and the soulful spirit, and that is between the generalizing explanatory and the legastical method of the natural sciences, radically opposed to the other model spirit and individualism and understanding of humanities. The transition during 19th century in the configuration of the field of economic sciences was not without conflict. And this situation occurs on the Anglo-Saxon sphere as in the European continent. In 1891, John Neville Cannon publishes the Scope and Political Economic, where he affirmed that it's in a context of production that relevant controversy over the method and economic was basable. On this basis, Cannon distinguished two competing methodological traditions that he termed deductive abstract positive on the one hand and inductive realist ethic on the other. In this framework, the author understood that the methodological construct was not related on the study of that we call the actual economic, but rather referred to the relative importances assigned by the theories from the social sciences to the various aspects of their research from the statistics, methodological positions, and their empirical applications. It's interesting to note that Keynes affirmed throughout his work that the methodological treatments of economics have not been conceived but the classical economy of the British war of the early 19th century in a systematic way. However, the position of Adam Smith exposed in the World of Nations are referenced in the most relevant work of both methodological positions during the 19th century. In a sense, either by the influence or opposition, Smith's methodological postulates are not somewhat critical in that he did not refer to an in-depth analysis of the methodological problem, or at least did not clarify the distinction between a priori and a posteriori resonancy. The possibility of clarifying in the methodological term Smith equal due to the breadth of the problem analyzed in this work. In line with what Keynes explains, that Smith's position has been susceptible to being claimed by its trend because according to the breadth description of individual phenomena that are analyzed from a theoretical perspective, this led to the world necessarily acquire a systematic character that give rise to interpretation of purpose relate to abstraction, as well as tendency towards empirical evidence. Smith's postulate in Malthus found an echo in inductive elements, while abstract tendencies are more present in the Ricardian arc. Ultimately, the critique of the classical is not limited to application to the deductive method. The question of the universality of economic laws, the need for economic scientists to get in touch with other disciplines, the validity of the historical documentary and the empirical method against the abstract theory. Indeed, in Germany, the historical school is characterized by refusing to accept the character of the economic science of the Anglo-Saxon and French economists. According to the Charles Guy and Charles Rees, the general perception among the historians was what the British basis on economic was drawing in the atmosphere of generalizations and abstractions, and consequently tired of general laws. They were going to demand a revival of contact with life history of the past and with institutional law. They accuse a divorce between theory and reality. In addition, based on the experience of German mercantilism, the same Cameralism, they argue against the conception and policies of classical liberalism, the need for the protectionist policies and expensive nationalism with the state presence, a necessary factor to establish the general orientation of economy. Finally, they express the need to establish observation and identify relevant facts in the development of societies, taking into account the variety of a specific situation in each nation. So, in this way, we can affirm by the second half of the 19th century, historical method framework in the German-dominant cultural territory. Through much of the production of language, this idea is associated with the figure of Guten postmodern. There is a complex theoretical apparatus that channels the initial proposals with the German word. This trend is due, perhaps, for the fact that a good part of the generation of analogous tradition arose in other spaces under the leadership of Smoller and University of Berlin. However, the production of William Roscher, Bruno Hildebrand, and Cornelius are those that took up the methodological problem in opposition to the classics and shaped the main notion of the German historical school. Roscher published in 1842 his work Lebenwerk, cited the Thucydides, where explained he seeks to unravel the main methodological problems by solving three problems. The first one is relate on the way of the alternative knowledge on general work. Roscher argued that inductive processes were the only ones that allow access to new empirical knowledge. However, the author shows that this process faces only from inductivism, generating an inability to encompass a certain and probable knowledge from dynamic of social work. From this questioning derives the second problem related to what was called the problem of demarcation. The demarcation of the dissimilar results of intellectual activities. He concluded that the approach to this social knowledge acquires a universal as well as empirical trait. An understanding of universal knowledge can be visualized and manifested and itself in the form of historical laws. From this premise and derived notions from an Aristotelian essentialism that in the first half of the 19th century had acquired a relevance at the University of Berlin and particularly in historical studies throughout the production of Leopold von Ranke. Its way on the empirical component evidence inspired by Francis Bacon, where there is a capacity to acquire knowledge as a consequence of a conscious discernment of man. It is observed then that the beginning of the distance from theoretical appearance that the moment was its maturity will be one of the fundamental elements of a methodological dispute in the German world. In this sense, we can say that in general terms, the specialist in literature has understood that the period between 1870 and next is two scenarios that imply a substantial change in history of economic thought. On the one hand, the first third is linked to a predominance of the renewal of liberalism. In the second half of the 19th century, some gaps in the classic theory were supporting an unstable socio-economic environment that regenerate industrialization and the consolidation of the capitalist business economy. On the other hand, the process of rebirth begins with respect to advance in the field of economic theory. It begins with individual contribution from intellectuals insert in diverse academic nuclei and with a differentiated trajectory that almost simultaneously advance in the common nucleus in the theory of the margin utility of value. In this way, at the beginning of 1870, the so-called marginalist revolution externalized various ways in the most simultaneously by Kamenger, Lundgren, and Stalchevas, consolidate an explicit objective to initiate a theoretical and methodological debate around the resolution of the maturity and its conception of value. In general terms, a conceptual framework is outlined that has a bending matrix, the subjectivity of a value of phenomena that gives rise to a process in which actors interact, particularly in the economic field, load without numerous subjective evaluations. Specifically, the alternate school of economics, in general terms, for a conceptual trend that you understand values subjectivism and process-generating phenomenon, where the individual interacts in markets loaded with very subjective wavelengths and bases. In this vision, a price formation guided by the individual production and consumption decision is generated. In this scheme, subjectivism is not necessarily related to an approach to value related to the identification of individual appreciations, but begins gradually to place the focus of attention in the research of equilibrium where the interactions will develop continuously as long as sections circumstances keep a certain permanence. This new conception came into clearer confrontation with the inductivist approach that predominates in the German intellectual environments, where economic sciences occupy a lower position under the ages of history. This stirred a dispute that is still in force today and is that of encompasses history and economic and vice versa. Menger is now into the economics in the 20th century that the premise that the relationship between politics, powers, ethics, and economics were subordinate to later, as the sciences at the best articulate instrumental with the theoretical. In sum, the principles of political economy As the founding work of Menger and the Austrian school demarcated a series of criticisms directly at the role of history in social sciences, principally to Russian Nies to Adam Smith, reinterpretation of rationalist knowledge, and the positivist doctrine of Bacon and Mill. Menger refused to accept the positivist conception of science together with the fragmentization of knowledge. He rejected the pragmatism of the abstract rationalism, and it questioned the validity of the founding theories of knowledge and the conclusion of the German historical school. The difference raised by the study of the empirical world and by the theory of social institutions, what led by the Germans to take Menger as challenge to the historicism was advocated at the time. And next, when we work about the knowledge by Walter Ewen and its support of history to the dispute between the inductive and the Austrian School of Economics, takes relevance. Walter Ewen was born in Germany at the end of the 19th century. Is the son of the Nobel Prize winner for the literature Rudolf Eucken. Beyond the genius of the father, it is key to rescue the aspects that affect his intellectual formation, because the environment in which he was formed was immersed into the tradition of German historicism, which was the disciplinary and the historiographic counterpart of the historical school of economics. Eucken was familiarly steeped in the historicist tone and academically in economics. Obviously, he needs to resolve the tension between these two worlds. Thus, he found himself personally involved in the disciplinary and methodological debate between history and economics. The foundation of the analysis elaborated by Walter Eucken were originally formulated in 1939, but its elaboration saw various instances until the third edition in German of his work, Fundamental Questions of Political Economy, whose argumentation starts from identifying the benefits and inadequacies of both streams. Eucken, moreover, is widely known as an economics for being one of the founders of ordoliberalism. Its name is closely related to the development of the social market economy. At the Freiburg School with Eucken at the head, as a possible alternative was developed to overcome what they considered the arbitrariness and the limitation of historicism through the idea of the economic constitution. This concept, central on the configuration of ordoliberalism, suggests that the questions relating to the various aspects of economic social policy should be supported by normative, legal, political, and moral bodies that avoid the emergence of unforeseen and consequently unfavorable situation. The starting point of ordoliberalism's critiques of the notions that are based on the historical determination has the Methodenstreit at its background. The initial introduction of William Röpke and Walter Eucken. In the Ordoliberalism Manifesto, it is a document that allows us to observe that the authors intend to make a systematic challenge to historicism as a result of indeterminacy in the face of the production of general knowledge about economic reality. In the perspective of Eucken and Röpke, historicism had not only generated an inability to systematize empirical elements for economic sciences, but had also been the generator of political fairness. In this way, the ordoliberal founders envisioned a science for political economy that must address the processes of generalizations that historicism could not offer, but that is capable of finding a solution to the empirical problems of economic policy. There is an obvious concern of Elkin with the question of method. For this author, the descriptive scope for the observation of the economic daily life cannot replace in any way the role of economic theories. Elkin's contrast reference to a growing force in the disputes of an individual historical and general theoretical economy is present in the first part of fundamental questions. The solution comes in hand with presenting a complementarity of historical, individual, and abstract general position. It raises the need to transcend the antinomy, starting from the combination of the faculty of individual life and the conceptual models. Elkin methodological concern has as its main objective to the conceptualization of the sciences that is capable for researching general knowledge, but at the same time capable to analyze empirically by economic problems. As an addendum for the validity of Elkin through his guiding work, it is mentioned that a few years after his death, the Walter Elkin Institute was founded in the Freiburg, with the final purpose of promoting research on the constitutional and institutional foundation of a free economic and society in the line of ordoliberalism. The validity of the institute is no less because its action or a rebellion of Elkin's primary intentions to seek a comprehensive understanding of economic and social phenomena. In this sense, the Freiburg line, inspired by Elkin through, strengthens the connection between law and economic and the contributions of Friedrich von Hayek evolutionary constitutionalism. Elkin's polity has a very strong approach to Austrian economic and broadens the more traditional research example, which extending to issues related to an international economic order as well as to economic constitution of the European Union. The approach to one of the reference of Austrian through also reveals its will to definitely overcome the conflict between disciplines as well between historicists and the theoretical positions. In summary, we can say that the contribution of Walter Elkin was the differences raised by the study of the empirical world and by the theory of social institutions led the Germans to take Menger as challenge to the dominant historicisms at the time. And in this way, the coexistences between the schools and between these two sciences became conflicted. And the question did not have a definite solution, but Elkin's analysis raises the need to transcend the debate. Elkin is widely known as economic for being one of the founders of the ordoliberalism. His name is closely related to the development of the social market economy for various reasons, familiar, professional, and relevant issues in his own historical context. He found himself personally involved in the disciplinary and methodological debate between the story and economics. The representative of previous criticized at the same time the relativistic and atomistic tendencies of historicism and the rationalism far from reality in its conceptual constructions. It's present that a solution of complementarity of historical, individual, and theoretical general positions in order to achieve a deeper economic knowledge. In sum, Elkin was in an ideal place to carry out a scientific or the debate over methods. but demonstrating that a true scientific experiences imperatively require to unite the historical observation with theoretical thinking. If these two dimensions did not converge in the effort to fully understand the economic process, it would be impossible to have an overall vision of economy. That's all. Thank you so much.